That's it. Call me a cable dude. I'm doing it on this table. Hey, everybody. What's up? Welcome back to the Games Case. Today, and only today, we are going to be discussing combat in Sonic games. So I figured, this is something that it's been discussed a little bit on the timeline now that Sonic Unleashed Recompiled came out and people are talking about the Werehog and obviously comparing it to Frontiers combat. So I figured I would talk about a little bit about how the series explored combat throughout the years, right? Whether it be, all the way back from Sonic the Fighters to all the way today to Sonic Frontiers. And of course, if you enjoy the content and want to see more of this, please make sure to subscribe to your boy and consider becoming a YouTube member as well. You get an exclusive video there every week, just $2. Lock in, support your boy, and this way I don't die. So, combat in Sonic. It's funny, right? Because at the end of the day, Sonic is very much a high-speed action platformer series, right? It's not necessarily a combat-oriented series. You think of something like a Devil May Cry, but there's always been some DNA or some emphasis on combat and fighting a little bit, especially like how the cast is designed, right? I mean, you think of Knuckles as a character's whole thing, with the whole fighting punches. You think of even stuff like, Sonic openings that have emphasized Sonic's combat, like in Sonic 06 opening, where he's attacking all the robots, right? You're thinking of even the Unleash opening, where he's fighting all the bots spinning on him, doing all these crazy attacks. Like, I don't know, I've always like Sonic has always wanted to be a little bit more combat oriented, even within confining itself to platforms, but it's not always that the series explored combat. They've always done it in weird ways, right? I think of the original trilogy of games. Those don't necessarily explore combat. I mean, you have the boss fights where you have some moves, right? Obviously, you have like your jump, and then you have your like, what's that spin attack you do in Sonic 3 where you press A second time, you get that little extra world. That thing is really cool, but I don't know, that's not really considered combat. I think the first time they explored combat in the series was in Sonic the Fighters, right? Funny enough, Sonic the Fighters probably the first and only home console Sonic game fighting game that they've ever done throughout the series. It's kind of unbelievable that we're 25 years past that now. But Sonic the Fighters, really cool concept. I mean, you look at how slapstick that game. I always consider Sonic the Fighters like a slapstick comedy action combat game, right? Because you look at the unique animations the characters have, the way their like arms get so big when they do like grabs or specials. Like, there's a lot of cool, silly shit that those characters do within the combat system, right? And obviously, the game you can break in a lot of ways. Like, Fang can just shoot you in the background without getting near you. Like, Bean can use little bombs. Sonic got to spin dash spam. Like, there's really funny stuff you could do there. But I felt like that was a good thing to explore, though. I mean, I really like Sonic the Fighters conceptually. Is it difficult to play and get into nowadays? Yeah, but it was cool that Sonic Team was willing to try out these characters having a bit of an action moveset. Now, if you ask me today, like, Fidel, would you like a Sonic the Fighters 2? I would probably say no in terms of it being like a Tekken-like fighter. I want it to be an arena fighter just because, like, these characters are so fast, right? And they're so, like, over the top nowadays that I feel like you're almost limiting them by putting them in this confined space. But like I said, it was cool that they at least explored the idea. Obviously, you continue to something like a Sonic Battle on GBA, where that game is the last Sonic fighting game that they've ever done in the series. And I think that game is like over 20 years old, which makes me a little bit sad. But Sonic the Fighters, what's cool about it is, to this day, I mean, people are using sprites from that game to make cool animations on YouTube, which that's something that I'll always appreciate Sonic Battle for, is that, those sprites have led to years of creative fan base work. But why do those fans make those unique animations? It's because the combat's cool, right? Well, now, is Sonic Battle my favorite thing to play? No, I'm not necessarily a fan of the top-down look of it. It's meant to be a bit of a party fighter. You could be 4 players and such, but I don't know, like, the way the game is designed, right, is not my favorite. Maybe it's because the story has some, like, annoying AI, or how Emerald is designed, or the level-up system is not my favorite. But I will say, like, when you're just doing, like, the free play mode and you're fighting, it's pretty fun. Now, would I ever want the series to have this style again? No, but I will say one thing I really did like about the game was unlocking moves, right? I felt like unlocking moves is something that, is something we see explored today. Like, we got that recently with Sonic Frontiers. But I don't know, the idea of maybe putting a certain set of moves on a character is something that it's divisive for a lot of people that like action games. I'd rather just have a bunch of moves unlocked. I always feel like I get decision paralysis when I have to be like, I'll put this move on my moveset, this move on my moveset. Oh, but I can't use that other move. That one costs too much. You know, it's a bit of a mix. You guys can let me know maybe necessarily in the comment section below if you like that. I feel like that's what made Emerald as a character unique, is he was able to grab different moves from different characters in that game and tether it to him. So maybe you could do something like that. But yeah, I mean, I like Sonic Battle's combat system. Is it something I want to see again? Probably not. And because those were the only two fighting games, it then went to the mainline games to sort of attempt a combat system. Now, Adventure 1 and 2, I would not say have like really combat. I mean, you could argue you have like the rival fights in those games where like you're doing a one-to-one, but again, that's just you kind of spamming a homing attack, right? I would say like the real next attempt at a fighting combat system in the series is probably Sonic Heroes, right? Because Sonic Heroes does the whole thing where you have three characters, right? You have Tails, Knuckles, and Sonic, right? And you could swap between them at any time, or obviously, you know, if you're Team Chaotix or Team Shadow or whichever Team Dark, and you could swap between the characters. And what's fun about those games is they definitely lean on combat a bit more, right? When you're Sonic, right, you can attack people with homing attacks, or you can do this like wind whirlwind that, you know, flips over enemies, right? Or you could use Tails, and when you're Tails, you're tossing your friends at the enemies. And again, depending on how many level ups you have, because you can basically each character can level up to 3 times depending on like what color orbs you get in the level, right? But when you're, you know, a flying type character, you're tossing your friends. The higher level it is, you know, the more enemies your friends can bounce on, right? And then obviously if you use power type, you know, you're gonna grab your friends, you're gonna do combos, you're doing much more damage, how it goes around. Like, I do feel like the game did attempt having a combat set, right? In fact, there's a lot of enemy gauntlets in Sonic Heroes, right? Whether they're in the main level or some of the bosses in the game are you know, boss enemy gauntlets. Fuck you to that one, what was it, Storm Castle, the storm haunted level boss level. You guys know I hate that one with my life. But yeah, I feel like something like that has always been an attempt at fighting. And honestly, listen, for all my faults with Sonic Heroes, I would say that system is really cool because it's a way to sort of, yeah, it's a way for each character to be played, right, in a level, because certain characters are better for certain combat scenarios, right? You know, you have Sonic where sometimes he has to flip over enemies, or you have Knuckles if you want to take down enemies with a lot of health. Like, and you know, long distance range enemies with Tails. It felt like a really cool way to emphasize, you know, the team factor, right? And that's what stood out with Heroes to me, is it's always been about a team, and they did a really good job of representing that. So honestly, if they ever re-explored the combat system of Sonic Heroes, I would be a really big fan of that, you know, because I feel like it's simple too. It's not like you have to unlock moves. It's all within the level, right? Like in the level, when you level up, what moves do you have? What do you have access to? It's not overbearing. And honestly, when it comes to Sonic, I feel like that's something you kind of want to do. Now, granted, they're taking it a very different direction today, and I kind of like where it's headed, and we'll talk about that. But like, I did think that Heroes handled combat pretty well for the time it was made. Now, if you want to get technical, I guess Shadow the Hedgehog kind of has a combat system, because you can grab weapons or you can grab guns and you can shoot them and attack things, but it is like the most bare bones. Like, me calling it exploring combat is like putting it so lightly, because you'll pick up like a sword or like a stop sign or something, and your move will be like swipe, right? Or again, you pick up a gun in the game and it just kind of auto aims at an enemy. So I would call the Shadow combat system pretty bare bones and probably not the best. Now, granted, do I want Shadow to have weapons, and do I think Shadow having weapons is really cool? Absolutely. I think that is a cool concept for the character, right? And I think, honestly, after like the movie and Shadow having the gun, even if it was a laser gun, I still think Shadow using weapons is a cool idea, right? And you think of Devil May Cry, right? You have Dante using his twin guns. I feel like doing something like that with Shadow would still be dope. I mean, obviously, we have Shadow Generations that came out recently, where it showed he doesn't really need a weapon because he's got stuff like Doom Spears, which, you know, kind of stun and attack enemies, right? And obviously you have all the Doom moves, which I'll talk about that when we get to that game. But yeah, I felt like with Shadow, OG Shadow the Hedgehog, it's not really a combat system, but it does open the door to sort of exploring what weapon combat could be like in Sonic, and I at least commend them for trying something like that. You know, obviously they want to go with the mature style for the game, but yeah, I'm not opposed to them bringing back, you know, grabbable weapons and items for Shadow. I would, if anything, like that. If they re-explored that concept, that'd be really cool for a future action game. If, you know, they took a Shadow game and made it more Frontiers like in the future. I will say, like, the next game that I think of that comes to mind would be like Sonic 06, right? Sonic 06, I would say Sonic 06 definitely has combat. And when it comes to Sonic 06, I'm not gonna lie to you, bro. I think that combat system is pretty good because, again, it keeps it simple. You unlock a few moves with the characters. You can even go to a shop to unlock upgrades for the characters, which I think is fine, right? But especially, and I think you guys could all agree with this, especially when it comes to Silver, right? Silver as a combat moveset is so dope of an idea, right? The idea of enemies shooting things at you and stopping them like you're Neo from the Matrix and then tossing them back, like, that is cool to me, bro. Like, that's the thing that upsets me so much about Sonic 06, right? Is how much, you know, how kind of finicky Silver's moveset can be, but obviously, you know, Project 06 fixes a lot of it. But yeah, I mean, while 06's combat system is not necessarily the bulk of the game, I think it goes to show you just how cool it can be when a Sonic level feels like, you know, an adventure type level with combat moments where it's really not that deep. You're never in a fight scenario in Sonic 06 for more than, I would say, like a minute, right? Because, you know, you're quick taking out enemies, you're unlocking moves, which I think it should be the point with a Sonic game. Like, I don't know if you want to be in a moveset, you know, a fight scenario for that long. Maybe I'm wrong. I mean, some people like Sonic Unleashed for that reason, right? Where some fights take a while, but I've always preferred Sonic himself fighting just because he does it really fast, he does it really well, and you know, we'll explore it more when we get to the Frontiers portion of this. I kind of touched on it, but of course, after 06, the next game that heavily explored combat was Sonic Unleashed, right? Obviously, this is the big one. This is the one that's being talked about today, especially, you know, because of the Sonic recompiled stuff. And man, the Werehog, right? Definitely a mixed bag for a lot of people, right? I know it's easy to say nowadays it's great. And honestly, now that I've grown up and I've played the game and I've replayed it, I've ended up enjoying the Werehog combat a lot, right? So the way the Werehog combat works is it's more sort of like a Dynasty Warriors game, if anything, which, funny enough, people don't talk about, right? Where it's very much like, you know, Y, Y, X, 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 or like X, X, Y, Y. Like, you're doing, you know, you're strong and lights, you know, and you're doing them in either different button sequences. It's not trying to do like heavy combos, like, you know, press X, A, B, up, Y. Like, it's not trying to be a fighting game system. It's just trying to get you to do different button mash combos, which I think is okay, right? Like, I've always said, like, you know, when it comes to even Warriors games, like, I don't mind different button mash inputs for these combat systems as long as they look cool, right? That's the biggest thing. If they look cool and they're interesting, I'm always for that, right? And what's cool, though, about Sonic Unleashed as well is that it is probably the first time in a combat system in the series history where you really have to think, right? Where you have to, you know, dodge. You have your dodge button, you have the unleash button, which is like sort of like your ultimate power booster, right? You know, you have your grabs. You can grab enemies and toss them into other enemies. You can do ground slams. You can toss them into the air. You can even do this thing where a lot of people have trouble with unleash combat because of this, right? When an arrow will be on top of an enemy and you press the grab button and then you go into that little QTE, right? It's the point of that combat and that move is that, like, the reason why it goes so fast is because you're doing it when an enemy has a lot of health, right? But when you do it when an enemy has really low health, the QTE will take a little slower time and you'll have more time to input the QTE move, which I always thought was like a really cool trade-off. And like I said, I mean, honestly, as I've grown up, as I've played more Unleashed over the years, you know, whether it was on stream and everything, I feel like the Werehog combat is really, really fun. Now, is the progression of it the best? Not necessarily, right? You get these little gems or you upgrade your moves, but I feel like if they had taken the time to upgrade the Werehog's moveset, like really from the start and give you more moves, right? And have things maybe be a bit more flashier, I feel like people would like it more. I think that's the one thing about the Werehog is it doesn't necessarily represent the flashiness of Sonic, right? But it is still really fun when once you get to learn. And obviously, obviously there's mods that enhance that combat. You know, if you guys want to try foreign input system for the new games, that's like a mod that tries to like speed up the combat, keep your combos going and all that. And I think the frustration with the Werehog comes a bit more from like stuff like the platforming or sometimes the difficulty with some of the fights. But I'm telling you, man, once you learn it, give it some time, it's really not as bad as you would think, and it's actually really fun. I mean, especially like when you start running into fights and pressing a button inside, there's like a whirlwind attack, or you can even do like a little thing where you're running around and twirling aerial combos. Like there's really cool shit you can do the Werehog if you actually sit and look at the moveset. Now, after Unleashed, a full combat sort of stops happening in the series, right? We don't really see that explored. Now, the one thing I'll give it to an extent would be Sonic and the Black Knight, right? I know Seeker Rings is weird because Seeker Rings is more like upgrades for Sonic, right? Where like you can, you know, help his speed, his stopping some attacks, but it's not necessarily the same. I feel like Black Knight specifically, I would say, kind of as a combat, because you have the sword, right? And you're sorting, you're slashing through the enemies, you can slow down time, you can even time the move so that when the reticle is right at white, you can swipe again for an extra move. And it's definitely not the most in-depth combat system, but there's some cool moves. I mean, you can do some jump spins. I think of when you get into a boss fight with a character like, you know, Shadow or Blaze or Knuckles, like when you get to the rival fights of that game, the rival fights to me are really when combat is being showcased, right? That's when you're actually like using your dodge button more. You're trying to time your spin jumps. You're trying to do that thing where there's that cool moment in combat there where you like both clash with each other and you have to like time your swipe right at the right second, which is really fun, you know, and that's a really cool mechanic. It's a really cool idea. And so obviously, now here's the thing. Sega, don't be cowards. Bring back Sonic and the Black Knight's combat style, because the idea of Sonic with a sword is so cool. You can never take that away from me, bro. Sonic with a sword is cool as fuck, and I love that idea, right? And I think the idea of going super fast with the sword, there's actually a mod recently, if you know, I could pull it up over here, for Sonic Frontiers that gave Sonic the Excalibur sword for Sonic Frontiers, and it just looks super cool when he's doing moveset. So I feel like the idea of re-exploring that would be dope, because you could even do shit where like Sonic is swiping the sword and sending out like slashes, kind of how like Link does in Smash Bros. You can do so many things with the Excalibur. So I mean, that to me, that's a combat system that I wish they had fleshed out more. I almost would have loved a fighting game with that. I mean, you guys tell me if I'm wrong on that, but like a fighting game with all of the, you know, Knights of the Round Table and added characters in it, and you actually have like some more moves would be so sick, because then you could showcase the character's speed a bit more, their flashiness. You could have cool ultimates. Oh my god, you know, I just annoyed myself telling myself that and putting that idea into the ethos. Don't do that, Phil. Don't do that. And yeah, after Black Knight, the sort of combat in the series kind of takes a bit of a back burner. I mean, the Rush games, you know, back then don't really have combat. I would say like a game like would you say that? I mean, Colors does not have a combat system at all. I mean, it's all stuff that progresses you through the level, right? Sonic Generations does not have combat at all. Like I said, there's some boss fights, but a boss fight does not equate combat. I feel like combat is, you know, you're doing a lot of cool moves, and that's where I think Sonic Frontiers comes back into the spotlights and bring combat to this series. So Sonic Frontiers combat system is something I actually really haven't sat and talked about in a long time, maybe since I reviewed the game. Now with Sonic Frontiers, right, I've always felt like I've loved the moveset there, because to me, it showcases and looks like shit Sonic would do, right? Like you have like the little whirlwind move he does, you know, he has those Sonic cross / key blasts he does these cool kicks. You get the Phantom Rush where like when you're doing a hella damage to enemies, like, you know, you're seeing a bunch of Sonics like running around, because obviously, you know, you're just seeing how many of them there are. Like there is some cool stuff with the Sonic Frontiers moveset, but that's the thing about Sonic Frontiers moveset. It is flashiness over substance. You could theoretically do the same move on pretty much every enemy and be fine, right? You know, there's sometimes, you know, where an enemy like will, you know, enclose themselves and you have to do the actual turn move, you know, to sort of get them out of it. What's it called? Why did I forget what it's called? Oh my god, whatever. You know what I'm talking. The side loop on certain enemies to get them out of their shell, right? But for the most part, a lot of the enemies you could just spam cross slash, you know, spam attack deck, spam cross slash. Like there is not really any reason to use all of Sonic's moves in that game except looking cool. And that's the thing where I struggle with my balance there, right? Is on one hand, I adore how cool looking Sonic's moveset is in Sonic Frontiers. But on another end, there are times where, you know, you're just spamming. You can go to a Frontiers boss fight and just spam the stomp move, right? And you spam the stomp move over and over and it just does hella damage for no reason. And so I would love it. Now, this is the discussion that's going on online, right? Is what do we do for the future, right? Do we continue with Frontiers moveset or do we go back a bit to Sonic Unleashed? Now, I think there's a middle ground, if I'm being honest with you. I feel like there's a perfect middle ground between the Unleashed combat and Sonic. Now, obviously, I don't want the Werehog to come back. I like Sonic doing cool shit, right? But I want the cool shit to be almost a little bit more rewarding, right? Because obviously, you know, big criticism of Frontiers combat is the infinite, the infinite parry, right? You can effectively hold parry forever in that game, right? Which kind of nullifies any challenge you genuinely would like in a fight, because, you know, if you just hold parry, attack, hold parry, but like if they did an actual window where you could get a perfect parry, right, or you can, you know, barely time the parry, but if you get that perfect parry, you slow down time, which you can do in the game by perfect dodging, right? But again, it's sort of like the feeling that there's no risk. It's usually just reward in Sonic Frontiers combat, whereas in Sonic Unleashed, right, like there was risk reward. I mean, you did have to time your block so that you could get a grab on an enemy right when the exclamation was on, right? There was the QTE move you would do on an enemy, right, to time your attacks. I feel like if they did stuff like that in Frontiers, right, where there were some QTEs you could hit mid-fight. Some enemies, you know, were not weak to certain moves, or like were weak to certain attacks over other ones, right? Like more reasons to actually engage in the full use of Sonic's moveset instead of just like, these are really flashy and that's really it. Now, again, like I said, I like the flashiness of the game. It's fun to me. I like doing cross slash into side loop, into the air kick, into the stomp, right, into the, you know, the cross kick. Like there's cool combat systems that, you know, and stuff you can do. I've seen crazy combat videos in Frontiers where like people are just tossing enemies all the way up in the air. But if in the next game they make enemies a bit more challenging, right, not, you know, the cheap bullshit challenging like in Final Horizons, I'm talking about like an actual, you know, 1v1 challenge, that would be really cool. And I think that's another thing is we're lacking in sort of the Sonic combat department, is like I want more 1v1 challenges, right? I've talked about this recently. Our Sonic Movie 3, I feel like might have lit something up in Sonic Team, right? Because think about how iconic now that Sonic versus Shadow super fight is, right? That shit was so incredibly cool and hype, and I feel like the idea of exploring high scale rival battles is cool, you know. And I think rival battles in the series have always been cool. I mean, even if you go back to the adventure games, right, even if you were just homing attacking onto each other, it was cool, right? Like that fight when you're Sonic versus Shadow in Green Forest as a kid felt really cool, even though it was you just, you know, spamming homing attack onto Shadow, right? And obviously Sonic in the Black Knight did an amazing job of that with the rival battles feeling like these really cool one-on-ones, right? And so bringing back rival fights in like a modern scale and everything just sounds super cool to me, super exciting. And like I said, I mean, combat in the series is not something that I'm opposed to. In fact, I probably want it. I mean, I love Unleashed and Frontiers having moves because it showcases that Sonic characters deserve more movesets and showcase moves. I mean, you think of even Frontiers, right, with the Final Horizon, you got Knuckles doing cool moves now, you got Tails, you got Amy, like you have each of the cast of characters doing their own attacks and doing their own moves, right? And so I want that to continue to be explored, right? I just want it to feel a bit more rewarding and satisfying, not only to unlock, but to, you know, to use all the moves at your disposal and not just one or two of them. Now, Shadow Generations, I guess, is the latest one. That one it kind of scales back. It's not quite like Sonic Frontiers. It tries to be a bit more like the adventure games where you have some scenarios where you are fighting an enemy. Like you think of like the Mephiles fight as a rival fight, or you think of, when you get to certain areas of the game where you're spamming Doom Spear, right? You're getting, Shadow's attacks near enemies where you're doing all the crazy kicks. Like it's definitely scaled back in Shadow Frontiers, which I don't mind that. I think combat should definitely be oriented to the type of game they want to make, right? Like I think with Sonic Frontiers, right, like when you go in cyberspace levels, there's basically no combat. The combat is relegated to exclusively the open zone. I feel like there's got to be some middle ground. I mean, you guys let me know in the comment section below what's the preferred combat style you would like to see, and what system would you like Sonic to be a lot more like? Would you like it to be a bit more like, a Musou game where you have your mashing moves? Do you like the way it's done in Frontiers? Would you prefer if it was more Devil May Cry oriented, where you really had to think about each move you were doing and timing your dodge rolls and timing your ultimates and specials and managing meter? Like I think meter management also would be really cool with a combat set, because Frontiers doesn't really have a meter system that you use for your attacks. I feel like, building up a gauge to do even more crazy shit would be awesome. I mean, an unexplored thing in Sonic Frontiers would have been unlocking Supersonic post-game. Now, granted, Supersonic was mainly designed for these big scale fights, but like a scaled down version of Supersonic where like you could just do crazy cool moves to random enemies would have been pretty dope if you, got and built a certain amount of meter. And I hope they honestly explore that in the next game. All this to say that I think Sonic as a franchise is something that definitely deserves combat in its core games, right? And I think there's times where it doesn't necessarily need to be there. Like I think of the 2D games, and I want my 2D levels to be a bit more like fast-paced, like platforming heavy, but Sonic games themselves like are these fun obstacle courses, but they throw in these moments where like you gotta be cool, right? And now granted, some people prefer like the boost style games where you're just kind of like, it is pure obstacle course precision, jumping at the right time, timing your stuff. But there's also, the other side that likes to have a bit of combat in it. And I think honestly Frontiers is probably the best balance, where you have the open zone where you can, flesh out a moveset, a combat system, but then you have the cyberspace levels where it is pure platforming. And I think that's sort of the best way to make both worlds happy, right? Or you think of even the way, because I think even the way Unleashed does it is, the problem with Unleashed is it slows down the pacing almost to a hog, right? Where it's like, okay, you get a cool combat system, but then like you're playing through a level where you're not really running fast. I'm not doing what I normally do in Sonic. It's great, but it's not why I'm playing Sonic. Whereas at least in Frontiers, right, when I do that combat set, boom, I'm dashing to the next spot. Boom, I'm dashing to the next spot, the next fight. So it's a bit more fast paced. So guys, let me know, of course, in the comment section below, what do you think about combat in Sonic games? Where do you think it could be fleshed out more? Where do you want to see it go? Do you even want it? And of course, I love you. Thank you all for watching. You're the best. And of course, I will see you all next time. Peace out.